Welcome to the JAMODI podcast. We are all surrounded by amazing coaches and leaders. So let's get an inside look at not just what they do, but how they do what they do. After all, becoming the best versions of ourselves is JAMODI, just a matter of doing it. Coaches, the JAMODI podcast is sponsored by 3on3 Hoops Hub. 3on3 Hoops Hub has run over 350 3on3 basketball leagues for kids since 1997. 3on3 is the ideal format for players to get a lot of opportunities, work on all skills and positions, and have fun with their friends. Whether you want to build your program, raise some funds, or start your own business, you can bring 3on3 to your community and do it like an expert by learning from the best with 3on3 Hoops Hub's free 90-minute training. You can register at the link in the show notes. Yeah, I think sometimes a big discussion is, do you have a system that you can fit any player into, or do you build your system around the players that you have? And I think I've been on both sides of that from time to time. But in your experience, coaching in college and everybody you talk to, where do you fall in that category?
Yeah, I'm sure you've got people that listen to this. I want to be careful because, as you just mentioned, from a college coach's perspective, you have a little bit more control over things because you can recruit into certain types of players. But that kind of that ends when you're not Duke and North Carolina and Kansas. You try to, and sometimes you're fortunate to be able to get in guys that do fit in the system that you want it to, the way that you want it to look. But that's not always the case. We've numerous years missed out on guys and had to kind of like scramble and adjust a little bit. And so there's always like that balancing act between my way is the hard and fast way in the system being the thing that rules everything else, and we're going to do it no matter what, versus being adaptable and playing to your player's strengths. With that being said, I do think that can sometimes be used as an excuse to, well, we can't run this because we don't have.
Yeah.
And I would encourage coaches, there is enough out there now. I'm really big on conceptual offense. You can run that if you can teach it. I mean, yes, there are certain parts of it, and depending on what you pick, if you're a team that your system uses a lot of ball screens, but you don't have guys that can set good screens, well, like teach them to set good screens. I think to an extent, we sometimes use that excuse, well, I can't do that. And I think that there is a place for being realistic about what your players are capable of doing. But I also do think that modern basketball has allowed us to be able to create systems that really can especially use smaller lineups, which has been historically the excuse, like, well, I just don't have and then whatever size player is the biggest for your level of play.
Yeah.
And I do think that that's one of the strengths of what we have this day and age, is the fact that you can sometimes level the playing field a little bit with smaller players. We did that this year and had a lot of success. But playing against bigger teams at certain points of the year and that kind of thing. And sure, like there's going to be some downside to it, but certain matchups and that kind of thing. But I do think that you can pick systems this day and age that allow anybody to have success. Doesn't matter if they're big or small or whatever. So that's a long roundabout way to answer your question of, I do think it's important for coaches to have like a system and to know like what you're trying to do, what you're trying to accomplish. And this is when guys come in, we're going to find the best place within our system to help them find success. But on the flip side of that, not be so rigid that you have to have this. Otherwise, the other extreme is, and I would really encourage coaches that are listening to this, do some self-examination and make sure you're not the guy or you're not the gal that is constantly switching what you're doing every single year to match the personnel that you have. Because I don't feel like you as a coach become a better coach necessarily doing that. You can't. I look back on the last 3 years. So the system what we're running is relatively new for us. And I look back over those 3 years, and there are things each year that I find out that I didn't know from the year before, but it just took time to be able to figure that out and make minor adjustments. You never get that opportunity if you're switching every year or two to a different system because of the excuse, well, I don't have that player anymore, so I have to completely change. I just would warn coaches not to do a complete overhaul.
Yeah.
If you're switching from 1 year flex offense to the next time motion offense to the next time ball screen offense, like probably going to not benefit anybody in your program, especially you, because you can't necessarily become well versed enough in that particular system to be able to even communicate it or teach it well enough.
Yeah, and I would imagine that skill training becomes a nightmare for
Yeah.
yourself and your players when you're trying to build your spring or your fall, especially from at the high school level, around those philosophies you have. I mean, there's really going to be hard. It's going to be hard to build any type of continuity with your players and their own skill sets from year to year when you're trying to do things that are completely different, right?
Yeah, for sure. Everything again for a younger coach, they think that they kind of compartmentalize things like what you just mentioned, like this is our skill development, and then this is our off-season workouts, and then these are our small group workouts, and these are our practices, and then this is running our system. And I think you're hearing more and more now about the really good programs have found a way to make sure that the players, it's actually very simple. They actually do the same thing over and over in each of those settings, but obviously with a little bit different context. And now we're in 5-on-5, and this looks a little bit different than what we did in 1-on-1, but what we did in 1-on-1 really helps us be better at 5-on-5. And so
Yeah.
how can you integrate all of those parts? And to your point, if you're changing every 4 parts of the season, you have your preseason, regular season, postseason, off season. If you're constantly switching, there's that lack of continuity, and the players, I feel like, become confused and they don't really grow to the level that they can. I know we all have heard of the story, like the poor kid that has 4 coaches in 4 years. And I think a lot of players are walking around with 4 coaches in 4 years, and it was the same dude. It
Wow.
was just you switched every
Yeah.
single year. So I think it really kind of puts the kids at a disadvantage too, and it may stunt some of their growth and their potential to be able to reach their full potential as individual players.
And instead of trying to constantly change drastically what you do, as I don't know what time, maybe you can answer this, like at what point you became comfortable within the style that you're coaching, but there is a style of play that all of us, I think it just feels right and you're comfortable. You get excited to teach it. I ran flex in college, and nothing against any of those coaches that run flex, but I think Coach Bliss would walk down at practice and tell me a new variation of flex, and I just kind of had to fake my excitement to him as a player. So there's a part of that, but then to encourage coaches that, so we were a four out one in dribble drive team for about 5 or 6 years, and then I just found myself without really a dunker spot player, or anybody in our program, and a bunch of guards that could shoot it. So I just started to look online at 5-out dribble drive motion, and Mark Cassio's videos started to come up, and I noticed
Yeah.
you've had him on your show, and I immediately reached out to him, and it goes back to what we said at the beginning: how willing coaches are out there, like yourself, to share the stuff that they've learned and what they like. And I'll tell you, that move from the dunker spot to the stretch has transformed us, but it's still the same concepts. Our skill work still flows. The way we lift still flows right into the way that we play. So like you said, it's not a different mentality here, a different mentality here. Now we do this here. Everything, there's like you said, a continuity to it, but encouraging coaches to find out what you like, but then go out and learn new ways to do it. I think that's huge.
Yeah, this is an entire different conversation, but what you'll find if you actually, it's one way to think about it, but what you'll find if you watch good offense, a lot of people, we can identify what good offense looks like, but if you were to ask those same people, okay, what is it that makes it good? It's sometimes difficult to like put it into words. And one of the things that I found that's helpful, I do a lot with diagramming plays and fast model. And so I will a lot of times be looking at like an individual play or a quick hitter or a blob or whatever. And really, I think a lot of times when we say that's good offense, we're describing like good actions or things that
Yeah.
are advantage creating scenarios. And what I like about what you just mentioned with Coach Cassio and Doug Novak is another one that's been really influential in me in my coaching is just their ability to kind of package all of that together and create a system in which those actions are used to exploit mismatches and create advantages and whatnot. And so that really is nothing more than what a system is. Going back to your flex, it was several actions, a down screen, a cross screen, to create an advantage for you to be able to have a scoring opportunity. I think when you describe it in that way, I'm actually able to communicate that to my players, and we were able to this year throw in some variations on plays, variations on what we did. For instance, we did a lot of the same stuff that you were doing with the four out and the one end with the guy in the dunker spot, and we had the same scenario where the guy who was the one in was actually sometimes better at the free throw line, especially with certain matchups that we had. And so we ran the exact same offense pretty much, but we added in some ball screens and then basically played him either at the nail or at the elbow. And because we had taught them concepts rather than plays, they were able to very quickly adapt and adjust to that. And if you watch our second half of the season, it was dramatically different from the first half because those guys had picked up the concepts. We made a few little changes. If you were watching, you would have said, "Oh, they're running a new offense," but we really weren't running a new offense. It was the same concepts, just with people aligned in different spots, and it allowed us to have a lot of success. And so, to your point, if you're teaching them how to play basketball rather than just teaching them basketball plays, it actually allows you to be very flexible. I wouldn't be surprised if down the road, what happens if you do somehow get a 6'8" kid? Like that stretch spot, you're going to be like, that stretch spot's not very good for our offense anymore. Like, but you're not going to have to go like, oh man, I better go back onto YouTube and watch all these coach tube videos and championship videos to find out a new offense to run. So, I think again, in this day and age, modern basketball, like teaching them concepts and actions, and just go watch an NBA playoff game. You're going to see the same actions over and over and over. It's the simplicity, but the execution within those simple actions that create the quote unquote good offense that we can see and identify, but sometimes have a hard time either describing or figuring out how do we apply that to our college or our high school teams.
Well said, man. Well said. I've made that comment so many times. Watch like, man, that's beautiful. That's good offense. But I don't know if in the moment, if someone has asked me, well, what's good about it? If I could articulate it like the way you just did, that's beautiful. And that's one of the biggest things I got from Coach Cassio was, the teaching concepts, teaching them to make plays instead of run plays. I think it's how I always enjoyed playing as a player, rather than having my brain switched off and having actions that we were supposed to run. And sometimes those are important. So I'm not saying we completely throw those out, but in the long run, what is enjoyable, what will keep defenses off balance, what's the hardest to scout? It's players creating gaps and advantages, knowing what options are in those, and then just making sweet jazz out there. That's what I love.
Yeah. And I think the big thing, another thing you ask is connected to this is I want to pick something. You need to pick something as a coach that you enjoy. You use that word a couple of times, like it's fun for you. There's a
players will
level,
feel that, right? Players will feel that from you.
Yeah, there's a different level of excitement that I have in what we do now than I had before, and the players, to your point, follow suit with that, and it becomes fun. And when we are playing in those small-sided games, but stopping and teaching them how to make better reads and where to look, and I'm still able to teach. And I think sometimes the coaches have a hard time with that because they don't want to take their hands off the joystick because things might go wrong, or my players just don't have that basketball IQ. But once you teach them that basketball IQ, it becomes fun for both of you. And, the last 2 years, but especially the last year and a half, I've had more fun not feeling like I'm having to control every single play down the floor than when I called plays every time the ball went out of bounds or every time that we had a stoppage in play or whatever.
Let me ask you this. This is from experience. This was my previous job as a varsity assistant. We had put in 4-out-1 in dribble drive, and it really was. But this was years ago. It really was based on one guard that we had that we just thought if we can just create space for him, he can really make it go for everybody else. That young man got into some trouble and was removed from the team. And we, instead of sticking with that idea, we completely scrapped it. And this was a couple weeks into the season, scrapped it and went more of a Bobby Knight, a motion offense. And some read and react, but I don't like when coaches say we have players that don't read or react very well. But like that, we didn't teach it very well, and it was
Yeah.
a disaster. What are your thoughts on? I mean, mid-season or in the season, completely just changing the philosophy of what you're doing, or even if you lose a few guys, especially if it's more conceptual, do you just kind of stay the course and keep teaching through that?
Yeah, we had this scenario similar to that. I mean, our he was the fifth leading scorer in the country at the time, and we were like really starting to peak at the end of the semester, and it was really my goal for us to average around 90 points a game, and we were starting to
Love
hit
that.
that consistently. We had 2 games back to back with 90 points, and in the first of those games, it was literally the Friday, Saturday right before Christmas break. He broke his foot, and that was probably our best game to the point in that season, and then he breaks his foot and we're like, oh man, what are we going to do now? And it really I think it allowed the other guys, we stayed with what we had, but it allowed the other guys to kind of step up. And that's one of the positives with this system. I know this isn't a plug for that system, but it is one of the positives with that
Yeah.
system is that, again, you're teaching everybody how to play basketball. And when you basically create space, exploit space and matchups, you are forcing the defense to make a decision. Do I want to go help stop the basketball where there is a disadvantage for my teammate defensively, or do I want to go help and leave my man wide open, which then creates those dominoes that maybe some people have heard about, but dominoes within your half court offense that ends up a lot of times with somebody getting a wide open or a somewhat uncontested 3-point shot,
Yeah.
which again, our system is designed to use space, be able to drive and make plays for yourself, or pitch and then find the open man. And so, I mean, we've seen the system go from a guy from being an average 3-point shooter to being above average 3-point shooter, and above average 3-point shooter to being a great 3-point shooter. But again, it's we work on everything that goes into our offensive system. We're working in it in individuals in every component. And when you have somebody who is injured and another guy is inserted like we had, that kid flourished and the guys around him flourished as well. And it basically leveled the ability talent wise, what you saw on the floor of everybody that was out there. So again, I think that if you're so heavily reliant on one player and a system to make that one player, like, you're screwed if that guy gets hurt, because there's nothing else you can. Like, I
Yeah.
get it. Like, there's nothing. You're like, we can't do this anymore. I've got to find something else. And you basically are then pretty much wasting an entire half of the season. Like, I'm sure there's like a Rudy story out there or something like that where a guy steps in and we go on and win the championship or something. I don't know, but like that very rarely happens.
Yeah.
And so you need to just be very cautious. I'm not saying like rely on your better players, like all of us do that, but again, I think the key word here is like balance. If you're so focused on those guys or one guy and then that guy gets hurt, then you're in trouble. But on the flip side of that, this isn't an equal opportunity offense either. I mean, your star players do need to take more shots and that kind of thing, but that goes into it as well. Like, what's a good shot? What's a great shot? Well, that's different for my team. Well, I'll tell you what it is for our team. The guys who are the best shooters better be getting the ball and shooting it, but we're
Love
going to put
that.
them in spots where they can. So
Yeah.
yeah, I just be very cautious about those. If you're making big drastic decisions, your plan probably going into things wasn't what it should have been.
Yeah. Two big takeaways from that. First, Coach Watson and I, we were definitely wrong and for what we did. And it's funny. I mean, he's at a school called McKinney High School, and they actually made it to the 6A, which is the largest classification here in Texas, made it to the state finals, the championship game. And it was an incredible game against Duncanville, who's a national powerhouse. And so they played really hard. But even that weekend when I saw them, we reflected back to, why didn't we just stay the course? And because we had taught them really good concepts. And so my second takeaway is, coaches, what if we taught a style of play that was really good for our best players, enabled them to shine and to really maximize their skill, but also allowed other players to surprise us, to grow and to advance and to step up? Because how many systems handicap players because their roles are just so either small or they've been told they can't do something like that. I've seen players really surprise me in playing like this.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those things where like you don't know what you don't know, and probably if you'd have known that beforehand, or you just had to live through it and experience
Yeah,
it to
yeah,
figure out like I probably shouldn't do this. So hopefully there is somebody out there listening to this, maybe a younger coach who like take a step back. I know things, especially a lot of those are like knee jerk reactions.
yeah,
Um, Randy Sherman with Radius Athletics and I have talked about this, but just the different types of biases that we have in coaching and how sometimes we can be very like making those knee jerk reactions based off of one thing that we noticed or something that went wrong in one game. And you have to think of it more of like a marathon rather than a sprint. And that a lot of times will slow you down a little bit and make you think twice before making giant adjustments to things as big and as important as like your offensive or your
yeah.
defensive system.
Welcome to the JAMODI podcast. We are all surrounded by amazing coaches and leaders. So let's get an inside look at not just what they do, but how they do what they do. After all, becoming the best versions of ourselves is JAMODI, just a matter of doing it.